Alright, so now that I've finished my first run of the Shadows of Rose DLC, I do want to give my initial thoughts on the DLC in some kind of review fashion, talk about the gameplay, briefly go into the story, and then give my own kind of thoughts. This is not going to be a massively in-depth review. I do want to wait to do that until at least the weekend has passed and people have had a chance to play it. I don't want to post spoilers immediately on day one, doesn't really seem fair. So I'll keep it as brief on the story side of things as possible. The gameplay you're going to see is from the first 10 minutes, so it's not a massive kind of big spoil. But if you do not want to see it, then by all means do not watch the video. But yeah, here we go. My own thoughts and review on the Shadows of Rose DLC. So to briefly mention the story and get it out of the way, simply put, the story is, as you probably already know, Rose has grown up past the events of the main game and has her own powers, and she basically wants to get rid of them, and in order to do that, she has to go inside the consciousness of the Megamycete to find something within to get rid of her powers, and that's pretty much the story for the DLC. Obviously there is more depth to it than that, but I do not want to spoil what happens as much until maybe at some point during the week next week when there's people have the time to play it, but yeah, that's the main story. Overall, the story is very good, it's very self-contained, it's pretty much here's the story, here's how it ends, there you go, but there are issues with things that happen within the DLC that causes questions to come up, as well as old things to be answered, which is good, but it does leave things open-ended. In certain aspects, it does leave things resolved, in some aspects, which is good, and it's interesting that they do that. I know they've kind of said that the DLC for this game is the conclusion of the Winter's storyline, but they have left some things open to maybe reintroduce certain characters from the Winter's games in the future, which is interesting. In terms of Rose herself as a character, she's a decent character. I think she was portrayed in the DLC quite well, and I would like to see her again in a future game, but again, with Capcom's decision to kind of end the Winter's storyline in this DLC, I don't know if that will happen, which is a shame, because I'd hate for this DLC to be, well received and people to like the character, only for the character to be left in the dirt in the next game or in the future. But moving right along to the gameplay, now as you know, it's a third-person DLC, it is locked to third-person. It feels great, like third-person in Village feels surprisingly good. I'm yet to play the main game in third-person, but I have played the demo earlier in the week, and that felt great too. I'm sure that will drive a lot more people to play the game. Some people do not like first person, and I completely understand why. But third person feels great, looks great, and it's good to see the character do this stuff rather than you feeling like you're the one doing it. Because that's kind of the vibe they went with the first person perspective, and not a lot of people are a big fan of that, but third person fits very, very well. Combat wise, as you can expect, it's Resident Evil Village. You get access to 2 weapons. You get the base handgun from the main game and the base shotgun from the main game. Again, decent weapons. And also you have Rose's powers, which do add a whole new layer to the combat. I'm not going to go too much into what the powers do and how they evolve over time right now, but they do give you opportunities to avoid enemies. They also give you opportunities to solve puzzles and stuff like that, and they do, again, evolve over time, so they're more useful as the DLC goes on. But it's a good addition. I was concerned that they'd be a bit too strong, and in some areas they might be. Again, don't really want to go into too much detail about that yet, but they feel great. They're not massively overpowered, and they fit the character quite well because of the story. One aspect I do want to go over in the DLC is the puzzles. Now, Village in the main game had pretty weak puzzles in my opinion. There was 1 or 2 that were alright, but the rest were very simple, and you could pretty much brute force them, which wasn't great. With this DLC, there's a couple in there, and they really do make you think, some of them. Like, they're not massively complicated things, you'll probably figure it out pretty easily, but they're not just as simple as looking at it and going, oh, I know exactly what to do. Like, it does take a minute to get used to it, and I do like that. Resident Evil games are known for their puzzles, and they're known to be quite challenging at times, and this isn't complicated, but they are, something you'll be doing for a little bit, because they're a bit more involved than the ones in the main story. Pacing of the DLC is very good. Obviously the opening is very much you getting used to the new enemies, the new environments, the abilities and stuff like that. Combat feels good, it's not ever too overbearing. I did play it on standard, and I will be playing for on hardcore at some point over the next few days, so I'll be streaming it again. But it doesn't feel like it's too much of a challenge. Enemies do hit quite hard, but at the same time, they're also quite slow. And one thing I do want to mention with the enemies right now is they feel a lot more like zombies than the molded and the lichens do. They're very, very much like zombies, which is very good to see. It's a good touch, especially to have an enemy that's acting like a zombie. It feels very old school in that sense. About midway through the DLC, you do get a horror section, and I'm not going to spoil anything here, but it is effective. It is good horror. It is just as good as the first time going through the House Beneviento in the main game, and I'd even go as far as saying certain points of 7, it's very much on par with that. It isn't terrifying, well, it depends on your preference of what's scary, but it's decent horror, it's good, it's effective, and I'm sure you guys will very much appreciate it, because, again, with Village, there's one big horror session, and that's pretty much it. This DLC is about 3 hours long. I think I got my first run in about 2.5 hours, and that horror bit is pretty much a good middle section of it, so you'll definitely appreciate the length of it, and what you have to do. It's very well done. But I think that pretty much covers it, like first impressions wise on the review. Combat, great. Exploration, definitely there. Story-wise, overall, the main story of the DLC is fine, but the secondary stuff that happens and is introduced throughout can leave questions, and does resolve some old stuff, which is good, so it works both ways. Horror effective, gunplay difficulty is fine. It's about a 3-hour run on a standard clear, depending on how fast you are at it. I tried to explore pretty much everything on the way through, and I probably did miss some stuff, but I think I pretty much covered everything, so there's a lot to do. There was also challenges involved with the DLC, so if you want to go through and do all the challenges you can do to get some extra challenge points to unlock anything you do not have unlocked just yet. But yeah, overall, thoughts-wise, I give it a good old 8 out of 10, I think, personally. I will go more in depth in a few days' time with the overall story, as well as the stuff they do clear up and the stuff that they leave open. So look out for that in a few days' time. But if you have played the DLC already, let me know what you think. Did you like it? Did you think it was not that great? Was it a little bit overhyped, or do you think they kind of really knocked it out of the park with this one? Do let me know. Over the next few days, I'll be covering the third-person mode for the main game, checking out the new mercenary stages, and going through Shadows of Rose again in certain ways. We're doing a hardcore run, we're doing as many challenge runs as we can, and really experimenting with the DLC and see what we can pull off. But thank you all for coming by. Remember to leave a like on the video and subscribe for more Resident Evil content, and I'll catch you in the next one.